wonderful speaker, MAUREEN O'RIORDAN, to us.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God, our Almighty Father, we ask you to bless our family, following the example of our teen family. May we never give up when life is difficult. May we have your strength and healing when help is poor. May the Eucharist be the summit of our lives. May prayer be our daily strength. May the Trinity be the source of our love. May our family remain united throughout the years, especially when we are far from each other. We ask this with faith and confidence through Christ our Lord. Amen. Saints Louis, Zélie, and Thérèse, pray for us. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit.
Yes, I'm Stephen Bean. I'm the chair of the Center for Carmelite Studies, which is up on the 5th floor of Caldwell, and Brother Darrell is the director. And so we're really happy to have you here tonight and to hear from MAUREEN O'RIORDAN. You know that during the year we've been doing a number of Thérèse events to mark the 150th anniversary of her birth and the 200th anniversary of Louis' birth and the 100th anniversary of her beatification and so on. So it's a big anniversary here. We've had a number of these events. And we thought it would be nice to do something a little bit different than what we've done in some of the other events, and to hear from MAUREEN about her family and certain members of her family and so on, to get a better understanding of Thérèse herself that way and those who lived with her. MAUREEN, I've known her for many years. She lives in Philadelphia. She graduated from Little Flower High School and Bryn Mawr College, and she was in the Jesuit Volunteer Corps. But for over 30 years, she's just been working relentlessly on St. Thérèse and knows her backwards and forwards. In 2007, she founded the comprehensive website called St Thérèse of Lisieux, a Gateway. And you can go online and look at, just Google Thérèse Lisieux Gateway, and you'll get to that website. It's got all sorts of information and other links. She's the author of a book called Praying for Priests with St. Thérèse of Lisieux. She also, 2013, she launched a website for the now canonized St. Louis and Zélie Martin, her Thérèse's parents, and also for her sister Leonie, who joined the visitation nuns, but her process is also on the way. And MAUREEN was invited to testify at the ecclesiastical tribunal examining her cause. And she's spoken, she's been invited to speak many times, like in connection with the relics going around. Just on Sunday, she was giving a talk at the cathedral on St. Thérèse. So she's my go-to person for any information about Thérèse. Like, if there's something to know, if MAUREEN doesn't know it, it's not knowable about Thérèse. So, what did she have for her last breakfast before she left for the Carmel? If anybody knows, MAUREEN will know. And so it's really a treat to have her. And we're hoping, too, at the end that there'll be plenty of times for questions. And as I say, she knows so much that you can ask about all sorts of aspects of Thérèse, too, that she may be interested in. So, MAUREEN, we're very happy to have you with us, and welcome you.
Thank you very much. I'm very grateful to each of you for coming tonight. And I'm especially grateful to Stephen and Brother Darrell and the Center for Carmelite Studies for asking me to come here. I also want to express my gratitude to Whitefriars Hall, where the Oak Farm House of Studies, which has given me such wonderful hospitality that I never want to go home. And foundationally also to the Province of the Most Pure-Hearted Mary of the Oak Farm Friars, because it was they who secured the future of Carmelite Studies in the United States in 2019 by endowing the Center for Carmelite Studies and the chair in Carmelite Studies at Catholic U. So they are the foundation of all these courses and all these events, and I'm very grateful for every one of them. Father Stephen mentioned the anniversaries, and in honor of the 150th anniversary of Thérèse's birth, she was born in 1873, she was nominated by France, with Belgium and Italy supporting it, for a biennial award that UNESCO, the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, gives in certain countries. They give the award to one man and one woman. So France proposed Thérèse and Gustave Eiffel, and they were accepted. So we're coming to the end of her 2 years as a woman of science, education, and culture, and it's being celebrated all over the world in many different ways. This event, as far as I know, is the only one in the United States that I've heard of to celebrate the 200th anniversary of her father's birth, which just passed on August 22nd. So I'm gonna, in honor of that anniversary, focus a little more on him than on Zélie, whose bicentennial doesn't come until 2031. Pope Francis is also about to issue an apostolic letter about St. Thérèse on October 15th. And when he was asked to do that, he also was asked to name her patron of all priests in the world. I don't know whether that's going to happen, but I would be very happy if it did. The Martins are a remarkable family, and I have 8 different conferences about various aspects of their life and spirituality. So unfortunately, I had to boil it all down into one this time. But I will say what there is time to say. If you would like to find out more about them or to see more, please look at my website for them. The URL is lewisandzellymartin.org. It's all one word, lewisandzellymartin.org. I pronounce it Louis because I'm an American. Of course, the French pronounce it Louis. And on the homepage of that site, there is a long slideshow in chronological order that tells the story of their lives and will show you pictures of many of the places and the people that I'm about to mention. For a long time, Louis and Zélie were well known as the parents of St. Thérèse. And since they were canonized in 2015, more interest has arisen about them in their own right. They were a 19th century French couple. They both wanted to be religious, but they ended up married to each other. Each became a skilled artisan and owned a business, and each raised the family from the lower middle class to the new class of the rising bourgeoisie. In 19 years together, they experienced much that many people do today. They saw 4 children die. Louis's parents lived with them, and they also took in Zélie's father. They had trouble finding household help, desperate trouble finding good child care. 3 of their children were abused without their knowledge. Zélie suffered from depression and anxiety, although with heroic courage, and she died of breast cancer at 45, leaving Louis with 5 minor daughters to bring up as a single father, and the youngest Thérèse was aged only 4. Later, Louis suffered from dementia and was interned in a mental hospital for 3 years. We can learn much from them, their faith, their love for each other, how they raised their children, their love for the church, for God, and for their local community. So let's begin with Louis. His father, Pierre-François Martin, was a professional soldier. He had been born in 1777, so he was about 15 at the height of the French Revolution, and the persecution of the church did a lot to deepen his faith. He was a very brave and bold Catholic, and the one letter we have from him to Louis is headed with the heading, "May God ever be glorified and loved above all things." While his father was fighting in Spain, Louis was born in Bordeaux in the south of France on August 22nd, 1823. He was the 3rd of 5 children. In 1830, his father retired, and when Louis was about 8, the family moved to Alençon. I'm confident that he attended the Christian Brothers School in Alençon because it was the only school, the only Catholic school for little boys in the town at that time. He did not go to secondary school. He taught himself at home by studying the French classics. At 19 and 20, he studied watchmaking as an apprentice in Rennes and in Strasbourg. He was a fun-loving young man and made a lot of good friends, unlike Zélie, who says she only had her family and God. He believed that he had a vocation for monastic life, so he applied in 1845 to the Abbey of the Great St. Bernard in Switzerland. It's located on a treacherous mountain pass, but because he did not know any Latin, he was refused. A woman who lived next door to him at this time wrote, Louis Martin was the friend of my brother's. When he returned from Mount St. Bernard, I can distinctly recall him and hear his happy mother exclaiming, "Ah, my Louis, my dearest Louis, he is a real pearl." She's right, and my brothers used to say to us, Louis Martin is a saint. He went home and studied Latin for about 2 years and then gave it up. We don't know why, but it seems that he must have understood that the monastic life was not his vocation after all. He went to Paris and completed his apprenticeship from 1847 to 1850. And then in November 1850, he was now a master watchmaker and clockmaker. He was 27 years old, and he bought a big house at 15 Rue Pont-Neuf in Alsace. Miss Felicity Bowman, a devout and benevolent elderly woman in Alsace, helped set him up in business. She helped him financially. His business was on the ground floor, and he lived in the house with his parents, his mother's nephew, Adolphe Maurice, whose great-grandson, Father Thierry Adolphe Morel, is a priest of the Diocese of Sèvres, wrote the definitive book about Louis and Zélie Martin in 2015. Unfortunately, still only in French, but I hope very much that it will come out in English. And also a housekeeper and her two nieces. So Louis was like the anchor of his little community. He was highly regarded in town, and Miss Pauline Romay, who was a member of one of the leading families, would have liked to marry him. That didn't come about, but they remained good friends all their lives, and Louis and Zélie named their second daughter, Pauline, for her, and she was Pauline's godmother. He was active in the Catholic Circle, a group of young men who met to play billiards, which I'm told is something very cool, to worship and pray, and to devise ways to help the poor in the town. He was also active in the St. Vincent de Paul Society. He loved to fish, and he liked to give a lot of time meditating and praying. It wasn't easy to do that in that busy house where he lived and worked. So in 1857, he bought the Pavilion. It's a little walled garden on what was then the outskirts of Alsace, with a military tower that's only one room. There's one room on each of the 3 floors. And he kept his fishing tackle there because there was a stream nearby, and he went there to meditate and pray. It looked as if he was going to be a devout single man all his life. He had never shown any inclination for marriage. But by his 30th birthday in 1853, all 4 of his siblings had died. And his mother, Fanny, wanted more grandchildren, so she was eager to see him married. And that's where Zélie comes in. She wasn't with the bachelor program. Zélie Guérin was born December 23rd, 1831, near St Denis-sur-Sorton, which is not far from Alsace. She had 1 older sister, and 10 years later, a baby brother. Her father had retired from the army and had become a policeman. And her mother, Louise Massé, was always described as a simple peasant, or some books say a rude peasant. She never let Zélie or her sister have a doll, and she seems to have brought the girls up to distrust men. Zélie had an unhappy childhood. When she was 33, she wrote to her brother, "I never had much joy in my life. No, never what one would call joy. My childhood, my youth was as sad as a shroud, because if my mother spoiled you, as you know, she was too strict with me. She, though so good, didn't know how to treat me, so that my heart suffered greatly." And here's a takeaway. One need not have a happy childhood to become a saint. Again, Zélie became a good mother, even though her relationship with her own mother was not good. As a child, she was unhappy, but almost all her children were happy at home, and she made sure they had dolls. When Zélie was 12, the family moved into Alsace, and to make ends meet, they opened a cafe, a billiards room, and a woodworking shop on the ground floor at their house on Rue St Blaise, the birthplace of Thérèse, where so many pilgrims come now. One day, that's what was happening there. But the venture was short-lived because Louise used to lecture the patrons, so they went somewhere else. They didn't care for her moralizing. In 1850, Zélie, who was then 18, applied to the Sisters of Charity of St Vincent de Paul, who operated the hospital at Alsace, but she was rejected. The superior just told her, "You do not have a religious vocation." Here's another takeaway. You don't have to get your first choice in life to become a saint. You can be mistaken at first about what God ultimately wants of you and still become a saint. Zaylee had wonderful common sense, so she decided to marry and have children. She hoped they would all be consecrated to God. But her family could not give her the dowry that was expected of a girl of her class, and it seems that it wasn't done to marry without that. So she wasn't sure how she could earn the money herself. And she had a very intense relationship with the Blessed Virgin, and she prayed to her about this dilemma. And sure enough, on the Feast of the Immaculate Conception, December 8th, 1851, she was energetically making the bed when she heard an interior voice that spoke to her from time to time throughout her life, and it said, "See to the making of Pointe d'Alençon lace." This is a thread lace for which the city was famous. Sometimes you still read in a detailed newspaper account of weddings that the bride wore a veil of Alençon lace. And Zaylee wasn't just a person who sat by the window and made lace. She was a manufacturer. It was a cottage industry that allowed women to earn money at home. And she had 15 women who worked for her in their homes. She would take the order and make the pattern and break it up and give it to the different workers. And when they brought back the pieces of lace, she would repair anything that was wrong with the lace and then weave it together with invisible stitches so that the final work looked like it had all been done by one person. She was considered a very expert work maker or lace maker, and her work won an award at an exposition in Alençon. And for 10 years, she worked for the famous House of Pigache in Paris. In 1858, her sister, who had been in business with her, entered the Visitation Monastery at Milan. And at that time, Zaylee was still studying lace making, and she was enrolled in a class with Louis Martin's mother, who thought this devout, energetic young woman who was so skilled would be the perfect wife for her treasure, Louis. So, oddly enough, they met by chance on the Sarthe Bridge. They were going about their busy everyday lives, and they came against each other. And again, Zaylee heard that interior voice that said, "This is the one I have chosen for you." And she just had noticed him because he was a fine-looking man with a very reserved military bearing. We don't know what he thought of her, but they were introduced formally soon after that, probably by his mother, since dating was not known in her class at that time. And they got engaged that same month. And after an engagement of only 3 months, they were married in July 1858. Their economic circumstances are interesting. Louis, at the time of his marriage, owned the house and watch shop and the pavilion, free of debt and furnished. He had his watchmaker's outfit and 22,000 francs he had already saved and invested over the last 8 years. Zaylee brought him a dowry of 5,000 francs and another 7,000 francs that she'd earned and saved by her own efforts. They were expert craftspeople, very successful, and earned a lot of money and invested it wisely. And in 2008, at their beatification in Lisieux, their vice postulator, the church's person who's advocate, it was his job to present their case for sainthood to the church, a Carmelite friar, Father Antonio Sanvalli. When I asked him what he would like people to know about Louis and Zaylee, among other things, he said, "Tell them that making a lot of money is no barrier to sanctity." He said Louis and Zaylee burned enough by their own efforts to buy 3 caskets in France. Now, they did live far below their means. They gave vast sums away, but they still, she left a lot of money and going concern of her death, and he, even after the years in which he needed care, still left a great deal of money too. So you can be rich and still become saint. Their civil marriage took place at 10 o'clock in the evening on July 12th, which is now their feast. And although it is not part of the United States liturgical calendar, I hope that it will become that before long. And the religious wedding was at midnight in the Church of Our Lady of the Assumption, Notre Dame, at Alençon. It seems that it was customary at that time for devout Catholics who did not want a lot of show to be married quietly at midnight in a little candlelight way. And let's see, what else did I want to say about the wedding? Oh, it might also have had something to do with the Eucharistic fast, which had to be kept till midnight. But their wedding night was quite unique. They returned to Rue Pont-Neuf, where Louis discovered that Zaylee knew nothing whatever of the facts of life. She wanted a big family. She'd always said she wanted to have many children and raise them all for God, but she knew nothing about where babies came from, or about what were then called the responsibilities of the married state. This blows my mind. Her mother was still alive. What was she thinking of? Letting a young woman of 26 years old get married with no idea what she was taking on, but there it was. I have read that they were not the only couple who was in that position. Please don't hesitate to come take seats in front where there's always room. And, but there they were. So Louis had explained what marriage entailed, and she was so amazed and so shocked that he, once before he met her, he had written out some lines about the ideal of a marriage where the spouses consecrate both their bodies and their souls to God. And it seemed that he proposed that they might live together, as the phrase then was, as brother and sister. So this was their eventful wedding night, and things didn't get much better for that poor man the next day. They had already planned for their wedding trip to take the train to Vermont to see Zayde's sister at the Visitation Monastery, where she was a postulant. And Zayde writes, "On that day I cried all my tears, more than I'd ever cried in my life, and more than I would ever cry again. My poor sister didn't know how to console me. I compared my life to hers, and I cried even harder. In short, for a very long time, my mind and my heart were only at the Visitation Monastery." Now, if that had continued, I don't believe that she would have become a saint, but fortunately it didn't continue. But imagine what Louis's wedding night and what the early months of his marriage were like. It's amazing. Right away, they took in a 5-year-old boy. He was the child of a widower who just had left with 11 motherless children, and he lived with them for about a year. But for the first 10 months of their marriage, they lived as brother and sister. People joke about it and kind of wonder, was this just some aberration, mistake? But when I searched for the spiritual meaning of those months, the best explanation I found was found by Antonio Saccari, who was a Carmelite friar of the Verona province in Italy. And he gave me permission to post a conference that he had delivered. And about these 10 months, he says, they pointed to an amazing truth. And what is this truth? Well, it all begins, or it should begin, during the years of youth, with the discovery that the human heart is made for the absolute, and that in the end, that nothing will ever satisfy that heart except God. That in the end, there's always a solitude in the human soul that can never be filled or healed by creatures, not even the most loved creature, the spouse, another human being. And this is the original vocation to virginity, which everyone, sooner or later, must come to feel, or risk the pain of an eternal wandering around on the surface of his or her own existence. Anyone who then comes to know and love the Son of God made human comes to intuit with plenty of effort that this primary virginity has to concentrate itself lovingly and completely on him. Only then is the true Christian born. This original Christian vocation usually becomes grafted onto a sacramental marriage. However, at times, it finds its expression and fulfillment precisely as virginity in those concrete forms of life which the Church recognizes and consecrates. In them, the direct orientation of the heart toward Jesus becomes a visible store. Time, thoughts, affection, resources, atmosphere, and works. Everything is organized around for him and for all that is his. It is in this sense that a monastery is always worthy of every Christian's tears of desire, even when his or her vocation leads that person away from that sacred space. Spouses should not flee from this original vocation to virginity. As Father Saccari wrote. And this vocation to virginity is not principally a physical matter. It's a call, whatever your state in life, to recognize the primacy of God. Louis and Zayde took for the motto for their marriage and their family, Dieu premier servi. It's a quotation from Joan of Arc, God the first served. After the first 10 months, a confessor intervened to show them that they were in fact called to a normal married life. And within a month, Zayde was pregnant. And at the baptism of their first daughter, Maureen, Louis looked so happy that the priest asked about it. And Louis replied, "This is the first time you've seen me here for a baptism, but it won't be the last." And it wasn't. He had 7 more children baptized at that church. Father Saccari also asked me to make sure people know that a normal sexual life is no barrier to sanctity. you know, a lot of saints, or some saints have been canonized who were married at some point in their lives. But sometimes you get the impression that they sort of slipped underneath because of the virtue they displayed when they were a widower or something. That, you know, they were married, but they were canonized in spite of that. But Louis and Zélie became saints not in spite of marriage, but in, through, and because of marriage. They also embraced the vocation of marriage to the full. 5 years after the wedding, Zélie wrote at the New Year, "What a holy man my husband is. I wish every woman in the world could have these people. That's my wish for them for the New Year." They went on to have a total of 9 children, and 4 of them died, and the 5 remaining daughters were often very sick. 4 of them could have died. And also during the 19 years of their marriage, Zélie's mother and father and Louis's father died. They did not become saints by folding their hands. They were surrounded by a lot of tragedy. On June 3rd, 1863, Léonie was born. She is now the servant of God, as Father Stephen mentioned. She was a special child and was unable to stay in the 2 schools they tried. She's the only one of the 5 sisters who did not become a convent at Lisieux. She became a visitation nun at Caen. And in 1864, little Helene was born. And Zélie wrote, "I cannot realize that I have the honor to be the mother of such a delightful little creature. No, indeed, I don't repent having married." She ripened in the vocation of marriage and motherhood. Their first son was born September 2nd, 1866, and she wrote, "Oh, if you knew how I love him, my darling little Joseph, I think my fortune is made." They always had wanted to have boys as well as girls because they wanted sons to be missionary priests. Zélie's father also came to live with the family about that time, and Zélie wrote to her brother, "You wouldn't find 1 in 100 so good to a father-in-law as Louis is." Louis and Zélie took personal responsibility, not only for their immediate and extended families, but also for their neighbors. They lent money to many people in need. When Louis went out, he always took a pocket full of change to give to anyone who begged from him. If he found an intoxicated man lying in the street, he would help him up and see him safely home, and then the next day he'd give him what they're talking to. When the family was out walking one Sunday in the countryside, that was their treat after the week's work, they found a poor hungry man, and Zélie invited him to come back with them. She fed him and gave him clothes and boots and money. Louis noticed a man who was now in reduced circumstances and now homeless, sheltering his family outside the gates of the government office that was right across the street from their house. And he relieved their immediate needs, he got them in a good job and set them up in life again. He went to a lot of trouble with the government bureaucracy to get a poor homeless veteran into a home. Zélie invited many poor persons into their home, gave them food, clothes, and money, and she cried when she heard their tales of distress. When 2 women who pretended to be ex-nuns were abusing a foster child they'd taken in, Zélie, who was terrified of the police, the government, and the courts, took them to court and persevered for months until she made sure the child was freed from them. She and Louis gave a substantial sum every year to the Society for the Propagation of the Faith. They were very mission-minded. The Martins were generous employers, and I find it very telling that they were loved by their servants, their employees, and the working people and poor of the town. Zélie wrote to her sister-in-law, I think, and said, "You know how quick I am," meaning how impatient, and yet all my maids love me and I keep them as long as I wish. It was said in the town that no one who came to Louis wanted for help ever went away without help. Sadly, little Joseph died on Valentine's Day, 1867, and their second little son, also named Joseph, was born on December 19, 1867. I'm sorry to say that he only lived 8 months, and 2 weeks later, Zélie's father died. Visiting the cemetery afterward were her 2 little boys and her father now lay, she wrote, "It seemed as if I would now be indifferent to any tragedy that happened to me." Little Sabine was born April 24th, 1869. They put her with a wet nurse in Allenstown, where they could keep an eye on her. And Louis walked up and down outside the nurse's house to try to find out if anything was going on. It's a good thing he did, because one day he heard the baby crying, and he went inside and he discovered the first instance of a Martin child being abused. The nurse was an alcoholic, the neighbors told him, and she'd gone out for a drink and left Céline all alone, and the child was malnourished. Fortunately, he rescued Céline in time and found her a good nurse in the country. Sad to say, little Marie Helene died suddenly at the age of 5.5 on February 22, 1870. She was only sick for 48 hours. Zélie was alone with the little girl, who had been sick but only for 2 days, when she suddenly died, and Zélie wrote, "That made an impression on me that I'll never forget. I didn't expect such a sudden end, nor did my husband. When he came home and saw his poor little daughter dead, he began to sob, crying, 'My little Helene, my little Helene.' Then, together, we offered her to God. Whatever happened to Louis and Zélie, they understood it as God's will, and they surrendered everything that was necessary to surrender." Less than 6 months after Helene's death, on August 16, 1870, came the birth of their 8th child, Marie Melanie Thérèse, who was always called Thérèse. She was the older sister of St Thérèse of Lisieux. Marie, the oldest daughter, went every day to see the baby at the wet nurse at Alençon, and when Zélie couldn't go, the maid, Louise Marais, accompanied her. Louise was a sinister character to whom we will return briefly later. And Marie, who was then age 10, noticed that something was wrong. And she writes, "When we had left, I told Louise that I was sure that my little sister had not been well cared for at the house of that woman, and that I would tell Mama that she threw herself on the wet nurse as someone who was dying of hunger." Louise responded that I didn't know anything, that all children were like that it wasn't worth the trouble, that I should worry this poor little mother, that she had enough troubles without this one advent, etc. And the younger girls were all terrorized by Louise, except Marie, but Marie was sufficiently afraid of her that she didn't report it immediately. But one day she let something slip, and Zélie questioned her and immediately took the baby home, but it was too late. And little Thérèse died on October 8, 1870. She was only 7.5 weeks old, and she died of starvation. Marie wrote, "I felt a sting in my heart because I reproached myself for not having said sooner what I thought, and for fear of Louise having caused the death of my little sister." Within 3 years and 8 months, Louis and Zélie lost 4 children, and during those 3 years, Zélie's father also died. That same year, 1870, came the Franco-Prussian War. Alençon was invaded, and 9 German soldiers were quartered on the Martin family. Like many French citizens, Louis and Zélie lost a lot of money. Louis sold his watch shop to his nephew in order to help Zélie with her flourishing business. And in July 1871, the family moved to Rue Saint-Blaise, Zélie's old home. That house for a long time was known merely as Thérèse's birthplace. Now that Louis and Zélie have also been canonized, it is called the Martin family house. In December 1876, Thérèse was born on January 2nd, 1873, and later Zélie wrote, "When I was carrying her, I noticed something which never happened with my other children. When I sang, she sang with me. That always makes me think that, since Thérèse said that her story of the soul, her memoir, was sing the mercies of the Lord, it seems that she actually started that song while she was still in the womb." In December 1876, Zélie learned that she had inoperable cancer of the breast. And in February 1877, her sister died. And soon after that, what had been happening in the Martin home was uncovered. The 3rd incidence of abuse, this time right in her own kitchen. Zélie's letters show how Léonie, who was then 13, was alienated from her and always wanted to be with the maid, but she did not realize how that had come about. Marie wrote, "I returned home from boarding school," and that was in August 1875, "determined to free Léonie from that vulture who had held her in thrall since the age of 5. Louise joined the family in 1868. On March 10, 1877, Marie discovered and told Zélie that Louise had beaten and abused Léonie, terrorizing her, making a slave of her. Léonie did all the maid's work, and punishing her whenever she went to her mother or played with her sisters. At the time, I believe, of Louise's death, Léonie, then a visitation nun, said, "I forgive my tormentor, and I'm grateful to her for looking after my mother so well during her last illness." To me, that moves Léonie a good way along towards sainthood. And it also shows why so many victims of abuse, or persons who have had abuse in their families, turn to her. That you can be a victim of abuse for a long time, both physical and emotional, and still become holy.
On June 18, 1877, Zélie and her 3 oldest girls made a pilgrimage to Lourdes. She said, "I'm counting on the pilgrimage to Lourdes, but if I'm not cured, I'll try to sing the hymns on the return journey just the same." She wasn't cured. The physical pain of her illness was indescribable, and I can't bring myself to go into detail. But she continued to work in her lace and to go to church as long as it was humanly possible. Her incomparable fortitude is more than I can pay adequate tribute to in English, or as far as I know, any other language. And courageous in the face of pain, she was also serene in the face of her approaching death. She was only 45 years old, and she had 5 girls, the youngest aged 4. Even though she wanted to live, she believed that God would not take her if she were necessary to her children. And when her confessor came to visit the dying woman, the maid remarked, "The good priest was less calm than Madame." Her heroic abandonment is indescribable. She died on August 28, 1877. And Louis, who was then 54, consulted his older daughters. And when he learned that they preferred to move to Lisieux, which was in another part of Normandy, because Zélie's brother, Isidore, who was a pharmacist, had married and settled there, and who lived there with his wife and 2 little girls, Louis sold his business. He left Alençon, his lifelong friends, the priest and nuns he loved so much, Savignon, all for the benefit of his girls. And in Lisieux, they lived in a secluded villa in what was then a suburb of Lisieux called the New World. And the little villa was called the Buisonnet, shrubs with the little bushes. So their life was much more secluded. They didn't know many people there, except the Guérons, their relatives. And Louis allowed his older girls to keep the house. He never complained about their inexperience. And since he retired, he was able to spend more time with his younger girls. Thérèse was 4.5, and Céline was 8. He was active in the church, in the Nocturnal Adoration Society. He had real estate interests, fished, and still did much to help the poor. Thérèse said, "Our father's very affectionate heart seemed to be enriched now with a truly maternal love." Céline, "Our father loved his children very much. He had an almost maternal love for us." In 1882, Pauline entered Carmel. She was the first. And 4 years later, Marie. Marie's departure was a great shock for Louis. She had never shown any inclination for the religious life, and she was his favorite. He stifled a sob and said, but without you, God could not ask a greater sacrifice for me. I thought you'd never leave me." You can experience real pain in giving everything to God and still become a saint. Louis allowed Léonie to try her vocation at the Poor Clares and again at the Visitation of the Mind in 1887. And on May 1st that year, he had an attack of partial cerebral hemorrhage. That same month, Thérèse asked his permission to become a Carmelite. She was only 14, and he gave it. She encountered various obstacles. The superior, the ecclesiastical superior, the priest who supervised the Carmel, refused to admit her. So Louis took her to see the bishop, who did not give a definite answer. But they had already planned to go on a diocesan pilgrimage to Rome for the 50th priestly jubilee of Pope Leo XIII. And Louis and Thérèse said she would not hesitate to ask the Pope. This experience with the Pope is often considered, and it was, an example of her outstanding courage. But at the time, Céline wrote that it was a fiasco. She went up to the Pope, she begged him to let her enter. He said, "I don't understand very well." And the bishop's vicar general, who was not happy because he had just said nobody's allowed to speak to the Holy Father, said, "This is a child who wants to enter Carmel, the superiors are looking into the matter." And the Pope said, "Well, my child, do what the superiors decide." And Thérèse clasped her hands on his knee and said, "Oh, Holy Father, if you said yes, everyone would say yes." And he reached out and blessed her and said, "Well, you'll enter if God wills it." And she refused to leave. So the 2 Swiss Catholics carried her out of the room, and Father Reveroni, the vicar general, helped them. And Céline said they never discussed this again. It was just a fiasco. And that when Thérèse received the order from her priors to write her life, Céline thought, that poor little thing, she'll have to write about the awful scene with the Pope. But now, there are stained glass windows and statues depicting it. It just shows what can happen over time. When she returned, the bishop authorized the priors to receive her, and she entered on April 9, 1888. So Louis was left at home without her. The following month, in May, he returned from a visit to Allenstein, and in the speak room at the Carmel, he said to his two Carmelite daughters, "My children, I have come back from Allenstein, where I received in the Church of Our Lady, which had been their parish church where he'd been married, such great graces, such consolations, that I said this prayer, my God, it is too much. Yes, I am too happy. It's not possible to go to heaven like this. I want to suffer something for you." And I offered myself. The word victim trailed off of his lips. He didn't pronounce it, but his daughters understood. The next month, Céline revealed her vocation. She wanted to become a Carmelite after his death, but he didn't need her, which meant that his family would certainly die out. And he said, "Come, Céline, let's go together to the Blessed Sacrament. Thank him for the graces he has granted to our family, and for the honor he has done me in choosing his spouses in my home. If I possess anything better, I will hasten to offer it to him." In June, he suddenly disappeared from the Havre. He's found, his health gets better, then it gets worse. December 1st, 1888, the archpriest at St. Pierre's Cathedral announced a fundraising drive for a new main altar, and he wanted to raise 10,000 francs. And Louis went back to the sacristy immediately after Mass and pledged the entire sum. The altar that is still at St. Pierre's is the one that he gave. And Thérèse said that the better thing he had to offer was himself, and that he was the victim united to Christ on the altar he had given. On February 12th, 1889, Louis's delusions got worse. He'd been raised in an army camp, and he started thinking that there was a war and that his daughters were in danger, so he, who was so mild and so gentle, armed himself with a gun. He didn't use the gun, but his brother-in-law, realizing the girls were in danger, or believing that they were, called in a friend to disarm him and took him that same day to the Bon Secours, the Good Savior Mental Hospital at Cannes. It was like an involuntary commitment, although Louis did not say anything. He thought he was going on a visit, but his family knew he was going to stay there. It was a very big place. There were 1,600 people. It's right in the center of Cannes. It's only 5 blocks from the Visitation Monastery where Thérèse lived, where Léonie lived. And Louis's section, which was for people called Study Tranquil, had 500 people in it, so it had to be regimented. His family was only allowed to see him once a week. Interesting to know, too, that Maurice Bellier, the seminarian, who was later Thérèse's spiritual brother, also died in the hospital. Louis, the Holy Patriarch, was now inmate number 14449. He could have had a private room, but he preferred to sleep in the ward so he could do more good to the other patients. He kept the fast of the church even there, and his family brought him little dainties. He shared them with the others. He remarked to Céline, "I am very well here. Besides, I am here because it is the will of God. I needed this trial. Besides, I can do good around here. How many need conversion?" 2 weeks after he was admitted, the sister said to him that he was rendering them a great service by bringing back the fallen away patients, the people who fall away from the church, to God. "You are an apostle," she told him. "That's true," he answered, "but I would prefer to be an apostle elsewhere. However, since it's God's will, I believe it is to break down my pride." 15 days before, he'd been living in his own house, managing his own fortune, the head of his own family. Now he had followed the nurse back to the ward. On March 9th, Céline writes, "The other day, Papa said to the doctor, I had always been accustomed to commanding, and I see myself reduced to obeying. I never had any humiliations in my life, and I needed one." And the doctor answered, "Well then, this can count." Later, notaries came and forced him to sign an act renouncing the right to administer his considerable assets. They told him it was what his children wanted, which was not true, and he sobbed, "Oh, my children are abandoning me," but he signed it. When he heard later that Léonie and Céline had gone with the Garons to their country estate at La Mousse, he said, "Wonderful, tell them to stay there as long as their good uncle thinks best. I do not want them to return to Lisieux on my account. I am well, very well here. When my mission is complete, I will rejoin them, but I don't think it will be very soon, for I have much to do to convert your whole world here," the whole world of the Bon Secours. In May 1892, he returned to Lisieux in a wheelchair. He went to see his Carmelite daughters once, and he was unable to speak, but as he was leaving the speak room, he pointed to heaven and said, "In heaven." And he died on July 29, 1894 at Limoux, the country estate. Louis and Zélie, I think, have a number of other takeaways for us, that your vocation can be lived out in your children. They wanted to have sons so they could have missionary priests, but instead they had a daughter who was named the patron of all missions in the entire world. When Zélie was dying, her one regret was that she wouldn't live to raise Léonie. But lo and behold, Léonie became a nun. And when I first visited Léonie's convent, there was a sister still living who had known Léonie's last superior. And I said, "Sister, what did she say to you about Léonie?" And Sister Françoise Thérèse paused for a moment, and then she said that Léonie was so calm, so peaceful, so happy and gay, that you would never have believed that she had a troubled childhood. Other takeaways: the life of faith does not prevent, but especially among laypersons, requires your full engagement in the world. To be a special child and even be abused, as Léonie was for years, does not prevent one from becoming a saint. 3 of her children were abused without Zélie's knowledge, yet she still became a saint. Louis was involuntarily committed to a mental hospital for 3 years, but he still became a saint. Now I want to end just by looking in a little more detail at who Louis Martin was and how he appeared to people around him. Father Dumaine, who baptized Thérèse, testified in 1910, Louis's character, which was serious and a little melancholy on the outside, was gentle and joyful among family and friends. He knew how to be benevolent in the management of his wealth, and he was widely esteemed. He was considered a perfectly honest businessman. After his death, his friends at Alessandro wrote, "His charity was most admirable. He never expressed an unkind judgment in regard to anyone, and he always found an excuse for the wrongdoing of a neighbor." And he carried this so far that he had a lot of real estate interests, so he was often collecting rents from his tenants. Once Céline was with him in the main street of Lisieux, and he knocked at a certain house, and the woman not only wouldn't give him the rent, she pursued him down the street, shouting abuse at him. He did not say a word or ever say anything against her. It's quite astonishing. They were devout Catholics. Céline said they were perfect models of parish life. Every day they went to the early mass at 5:30 because that was the one that servants and working people could attend. It was a very class-conscious society, but the church provided a sacred space where they could step over that boundary. And they sometimes, if they saw people who were poor and needed church, would invite them to come back with them. When the neighbors heard the door close as they were leaving for church, they'd say, "Oh, it's only that holy Martin couple going to church. We can turn over and sleep a while longer." Louis refused ever to open his shop on Sunday, even though that was the only day that all the country people could come in and buy watches. He kept the Sabbath very generously. Also, as a young man, he was athletic. He came from a military family. He was very brave. He saved several people from drowning and from house fires. And whenever there was danger, he rushed to the spot. He wasn't a dreamy old man all his life. And when the pilgrims returned from Lourdes, there was a feeling in the town against public pilgrimages. And when they got off the train, they encountered some hostility, but Louis protected them from the jeering people. Even though he was almost 50, he would have liked to volunteer for the Franco-Prussian War. A former maid wrote, "Mr. Martin, above all, was a saint and so brave. He was afraid of nothing. He was generous, especially to the poor. He had a reputation for having perfect integrity. And in the marketplace, everyone wanted him to buy something from their stall because they said it would bring luck. He paid his debts promptly, and he had heard a true story of a seamstress who was starving because none of her customers had paid her. And she went to all their houses and knocked and begged for money. None of them gave it to her, and the poor woman actually starved to death. And his voice would tremble with indignation when he told that story. He would never allow even a day's work to remain unpaid for one night. He was a virile man with a normal marriage and sexual life, not incompatible with the highest sanctity. Although he was gentler than his wife, he was the authority in his home. He loved being with his children. He was very playful with them. He loved nature and beauty. He was a man of deep faith, committed to the contemplative life and the life of prayers. He participated actively in the life of the church and publicly professed himself a Christian. For example, if a priest was bringing the sacrament to a person who was dying, Louis would accompany him with a candle. He was in Eucharistic processions, and it was a real sacrifice for him because he was bald on the top of his head, but he would, of course, always remove his hat. Well, not everyone did that, and there would be cheery Republicans standing around. And as Louis passed one corner where there was a man with a jeering expression on his face, obviously keeping his hat on purpose, Louis reached out and knocked it off. Now, of course, I'm not recommending that the next time we're in a Eucharistic procession, you should try to assault the bystanders, but it does show that he wasn't a dreamy, faithful person. Among the family, he was the life of the party, singing songs, reciting poems, making toys. He had all kinds of fun with his girls. He was much loved as a friend, and he was happy. He wrote, "The memories of my whole life were so sweet that despite the trials endured, there are times when my heart leaps with joy." He was before his time. He sold his own business, for which he trained for years, to take over the business end of Zadie's work. He spent a lot of time with his children. He retired so he could be an attentive single father. And unlike many Frenchmen at the time, he not only didn't oppose his daughter's entry to the convents, but he promoted it and he gave large sums when they entered on their profession and other occasions. Even when his wife was alive, he participated fully in co-parenting. As a father, he developed his daughter's talents. He encouraged them to take lessons in painting. He made journeys with them so they could go on retreats or see a spiritual director, and he showed reverence for their spiritual lives and vocations. He did not treat the family like property. Louis's years of illness and the remarkable sanctity he showed during them would require another conference, which I'm not going to do tonight. But I would like to say something about how he accepted the humiliation of being confined in what was then called the nut house. There was much more stigma then than there is now to going to, what we call a mental hospital, but on the street, it wasn't called that. And I have heard that the people also whispered inaccurately that he had syphilis, or that Thérèse had driven him out of his mind because he loved her so much and she left him. But Louis showed by accepting that and bringing so many other patients back to God, he shows that there are seasons in a man's life. He had had the season of contributing, being an authority, and leading a busy, active life. And now, when his time came for the season of living under the authority and care of others, he both submitted to the authority and gratefully accepted the care. He said to his brother-in-law, Isidore, "In heaven, I'll repay you for all this." He allowed them to serve him. He developed the receptivity that was necessary for what was happening in his life at that moment. Seguin wrote that in granting Thérèse the incomparable Father, whose goodness was a first picture of the goodness of our Father in heaven, the Lord was preparing her to penetrate more than anyone else into the mystery of the divine paternity. I believe that Louis's offering himself in the church at Allenstein in May 1888 prepared the way for Thérèse's offering of herself in merciful love, and that God prepared in him the birth of Thérèse's way. As a daughter of the church, Thérèse transcended her parents, but they prepared the way for her mission. When he was already very sick, he said, "Do not worry about me, children, for I am the friend of God." In forming Thérèse and surrendering her, themselves, and each other to God, Louis and Zadie Martin wrote with their lives the preface to a new chapter in the history of Christian spirituality that is the way of confidence and love of St. Thérèse. Thank you. Thank you very much. Are we ready for questions?
Yes.
Don't all speak at once now. Yes.
I was wondering, I was really struck by, I never heard Louise abuse described in that detail, and it was really striking, just in the whole narrative that you were giving. I was wondering if you could say a little bit about her relationship with Thérèse later in life.
Yes.
And just their friendship, and
Yes.
some of the dynamics of that.
Yes. Lenny mentions, thank you, that her education was incomplete because she was not able to stay in school, they didn't have a teacher at home, etc. And after Thérèse left the Benedictine Abbey, when she herself was 13, and I think Lenny was maybe 21, she said, "My little sister used to teach me using great tact to fill the gaps in my education." There were times when I wondered if Thérèse looked on Lainey, as the rest of the family did, as like, poor lady. Can someone please open this morning? Thank you. But I noticed in 1895, when Leonie was making her third try at religious life, she was, thank you very much. She was at the visitation at Cannes, where she did end her life. She entered there in 1899 definitively and lived there until her death in 1941. But she also spent 2 years there between 1893 and 1895. And the letters that Thérèse wrote her then really show kind of a first draft of Thérèse's way. And I see that they had a very spiritually very close relationship. In fact, Thérèse's last letter to Leonie, by that time she had left, in 1895, it became clear that the visitation wasn't going to work out for her. And she spent the years until after the death of Thérèse living with her aunt and uncle. So she was living as an orphan laywoman. And Thérèse wrote her last letter in August 1897. And she said, "The only happiness on earth is to apply oneself and always find delightful the lot Jesus is giving us. Your lot is so beautiful, dear little sister. If you want to be a saint, this will be easy for you, because at the bottom of your heart, the world is nothing to you. You can then, like us, meaning like the 3 Carmelite sisters, occupy yourself with the one thing necessary, that is to say, while you give yourself up devotedly to exterior works, your purpose is simple, to please Jesus, to unite yourself more intimately with him." So I feel that Thérèse had an understanding of Leonie's great desire to please God, and she had always from childhood wanted to become a nun. But Thérèse also saw, even though she herself wanted Leonie to become a nun, and she is said to have told one of the Benedictine nuns, "After I'm dead, I'll make Leonie return to the visitation at Cannes, and this time she'll persevere." But even though at the time that Thérèse wrote this letter, Leonie was a laywoman, Thérèse understood her great desire, and that what really matters isn't your state of life. It's if you do please Jesus and unite yourself with him as intimately as possible. I do hope there are other questions. I wouldn't want to feel that I told you everything. Yes?
Thank you for your lovely storytelling and bringing this family to life. I particularly loved how you tied in just lessons for us throughout your narrative. 2 questions.
Yes.
One, do you have any thoughts, or can you help explain some of the paintings or the pictures on?
I can explain one of them. This icon was done by an Italian iconographer named Paolo Orlando. And it's the property of a church in Italy, whose name I can't remember. But when I saw it, I wrote to the pastor and asked if I could post it on my website. And lo and behold, Thérèse and her family give you much more than you ever asked for. And he answered and gave me the right to distribute it. So then I found Trinity Icon Stores in Colorado. There's a man named John O'Brien there, and he produces icons in all kinds of formats, and greeting cards and mugs and things like that. And he worked on it, and now anyone can buy it. But to go into more detail about who's actually in the icon, you will see Louis and Zeta, of course, in the middle. Zeta is holding her, the child in pink, I believe, is the little Maureen Melody Thérèse, who only lived 7.5 weeks. The other one must be the child, the boy who lived for 5 months. And I think this one at the bottom must be the one who's 8 months, although that looks awfully, looks like an awfully young child. And then in the blue dress, it's the little lady who lived in 5.5. Then you can see the 4 Carmelites, who I think are in order of age, Maureen and Pauline. Then you see Leonie in the black visitation pattern, she's easy to pick out. Then Sabine and Thérèse. So that's who they are. I'm not so familiar with this painting here, but of course it has the same cast of characters. Did you say that you had another question?
Second quick question.
Yes.
Do you actually know what Thérèse had for breakfast?
No, I'm afraid not. That was one of Stephen's very generous characterizations. But I do have a great appetite for knowledge about her, about details. For example, when Story of Soul first came out, they said, it said that when Thérèse was praying during the hour of mental prayer at night, she was irritated by another nun who rattled the rosary. But there was no rosary, nobody rattled it. What actually happened was, I think this is to read Jesus. In this quiet hour of mental prayer, Thérèse, they had to sit where they sit, and she had to sit right in front of Read Jesus. tapped her teeth like this with her fingernail. The whole hour. The whole hour. And Thérèse says, I really wanted to turn my head and stare at her because I'm sure she was unaware of this noise. But I thought that it wasn't the best thing to do, so she would just wait the whole time and listen and offer what she called this little concert to Jesus. It was not possible to pray, so she just offered a concert. Well, when I learned this, I thought, which finger and which tooth? But no, I'm sorry, I can't answer the breakfast thing. As a matter of fact, you know what? I don't think they ate breakfast because they all know what it has.
Trick question. Yeah.
I'd be very pleased if there were more questions. Brother Jeremiah.
You mentioned, I think, that Marie was the sort of unexpected vocation
Yes.
from the family. Can you speak to that a bit more?
Yes, Marie was extremely independent. When Louise tried to terrorize her, she said, "Leave me alone, Louise, I'm quite free." So Louise nicknamed her, "I'm quite free Marie." She also did not care for society. When they wanted her to go out socially, she felt like they were trying to dress her up and try to marry her off, and she started to cry. And she couldn't bear to be bothered with matters of dress. And she wrote later when she was in Carmelite, "You can imagine how happy I am now. All I ever have to do is let down my sleeves." She's doing housework to go in the choir. But Sadie wrote once when she was making it more or less necessary for Marie to go, and some other girls showed up at the lady's house. She said, "I think she's quite unsociable enough. A little socializing would do her some good." But she didn't want to become a nun, and she didn't want to get married. So no one seemed to know what was going to happen to her. At that time, it seems that it was customary for priests to be permitted to preach in factories. And Father Pichon, who was a Frenchman who later did a lot of missionary work in Canada, was preaching in a factory somewhere near the zoo. And Marie went there to hear him. And she began to confess to him, and he decided that she had a religious vocation. So it seems that it was under his influence that she entered Louise McConnell. But she said later that she was very happy there. And the day that she came in and Pauline was asked to take her on a tour, it's the smallest of all the French convents. And she looked around and thought, I'm going to spend the rest of my life within these four walls. But years later she wrote, "Ah, Mother, I found Jesus in these four walls, and finding him, I've been happy." Yes?
So anyone who's paying attention these days probably notices that we live in very dark times where nihilism is more and more pervasive. So my question to you is, if Thérèse was alive today,
Yes.
what do you think she would do? She would retreat from the world in contemplation, or would she try to shine some light for this darkness?
I think in a way she's probably trying to do both. Of course, it's always dangerous to extrapolate about what you think Thérèse would do, but what she did at the time was to follow the vocation to which she felt God called her. She didn't go around saying everyone should be like that. And I'm under the impression that if she discerned the same vocation, she would still have become a contemplative nun and tried through prayer to let the light shine on the world. She also did, of course, during her lifetime and during the last 18 months when she didn't believe there was a heaven, she felt united to the people who thought there was nothing after death except the night of nothingness. Well, she did not think that, but she understood something what they were going through. And she offered her own trial so that, as she said, poor sinners could one day see the light of faith shine. So I have a feeling that she would probably do the same thing today. That's all light I have on that subject. Thank you. Are there any other questions? Yes.
One of the things that strikes me about the Martin family and their childhoods is the emphasis on pilgrimages, and then your details about the Jerry and Lewis and the streets and stuff. I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about the spirituality of pilgrimages in the Martin family and why they were so important to them.
Yes. Lewis was the one who loved pilgrimages. Zélie did not like going away from home. She was happiest at home. But he often went on pilgrimages both before and after his marriage. When Marie was dying, it seemed like of typhoid fever at age 13, he made a pilgrimage for that. Zélie also took Léonie on a pilgrimage to Our Lady of Sèvres, the seat of their diocese. Zélie had a habit of going there every December 8th with her special request. And she always said, even though it was in another town, she wanted to be the first one. She didn't want anybody else to get in ahead of her with that lady. They also made the pilgrimage to Lourdes, and they made pilgrimages to other lesser known spots near them. I think that part of the importance of the pilgrimage was that it was an opportunity to profess the faith in public. which was important then since they lived in a, substantially anti-Catholic environment. So I think that was part of it, but I also wonder if it wasn't an expression physically of the pilgrimage of faith that we were all making. That we're coming from one place to another as we're drawn more and more to God, and geographically they were doing that way too. You're welcome. Anyone else? Even if you ask a question, you can still ask another. All right then. Thank you very much. Stephen, is there anything else you'd like to say over that?
So maybe just to tell people that we're having the annual lecture at Carmelite Studies on November 14th, right?
Yes.
And will it be?
It will be here in the Caldwell Auditorium.
And we have Mary Froelich coming for that, who's a great expert on St. Thérèse too. And between now and then, we're probably going to have a talk by Father Simon Nolan from who's a Carmelite from Dublin, so on, to talk about Thérèse and working that out too. So keep your eyes open. There will be other Thérèse events, and in 2025, it's the 100th anniversary of her canonization. So maybe we'll do the whole thing all over again.
Was I mistaken in thinking that Mary Froelich's lecture was going to be at the John Paul II Shrine?
It was going to.
Oh, I see, but now it's not. Okay, thank you.
So thank you all for coming, and thanks again to Maureen.
Thank you very much.
If you want to listen to the lecture or part of the lecture again, it's being recorded, and you can find that recording on the Carmelite Centre's website. So just simply look up the Centre for Carmelite Studies. We'll post that within the next 24 hours, most likely. I'm sure you'd like to revisit parts of this. Wonderful. We're also thinking of having conversations with Thérèse, inviting people to come along, especially the president who has great devotion to St Thérèse, to come along and share their own experiences of Thérèse, just to tell their stories. And so we're going to have that opportunity probably in the next few weeks. So if you've got your own little Thérèse story, please come along and share that with us. It should be this very special year of St Thérèse and these wonderful celebrations. So I think we've just had such a beautiful evening and a wonderful presentation, very inspiring presentation today. I just grown to love the Martin family so much more. I didn't know very much about them, probably like most of us, but what wonderful, wonderful insights, and what a deep love that Maureen of the Thérèse and her family that Maureen has shared with us today. We'll have to have her back, don't you think? Yeah. She's just a wonderful gift to us. So thank you very much, Maureen.
Thank you. You're very welcome, Brother Darrell. I appreciate everyone coming. And if there's anything I can do for you, or if you want to find out more about the Martins, I have 3 websites: St Thérèse of Lisieux, a Gateway. And if you just find that, there are links to the other 2: Louis and Xavier Martin, which is louisandxaviermartin.org, and leoniemartin.org. And on those websites, each one of them has a link that says email me, so you can always reach me that way if there's anything I can do for you. Thank you.